Well, what I've tried to do is copy people that are smarter than me. And I think one of the things that you guys will see as you go through your career that you're always learning something from somebody. And what I learned a lot from was a project manager. His name was Ed Malden. He's retired now. He was a NASA lineman for a long time out at Ames. Um, and he was unique. And I was working on one of his projects. And at the same time the project was running, he also ran a study using some university people. And kind of what they found was is that projects where they had good communications and good team cohesion succeeded. And then when you had projects that didn't, they didn't. They had a tendency to be in trouble or fail. Um, and so if you kind of take that lesson that you get from team cohesion and how you build the right team and make sure that you set those kind of comm norms, that was really powerful for me. When later on, as I kind of grew up and was running the project, I kept that lesson to heart, and that's always kind of like job one. Okay, whether you're running a program or project, anything, if you've got good team cohesion, that's going to help you. And that's a more of a soft skill, if you will. So we did a number of things trying to do that. So we looked at team chemistry, really important, because if you have people on the project kind of or a program or wherever kind of shut down where they don't want to talk to somebody because they don't like them, your communication's going to bottle up and you're not going to get the information you need or the team needs to make a good decision. So that's really important. And so how do you go ahead and support that? You have to be very careful about how you communicate. You have to be very careful about um, who the team members are, and then try to go ahead and make sure that you have that balance. And then, heaven forbid, you got to have a little bit of fun because people will work harder if they're having fun than if it's you're being highly directive. And so, for instance, on stage three, which I had a lot of fun running. I had my difficult times too, for sure. We implemented chief engineer and SMA CSO um, person of the month awards. And so we did this as a little thing where we get the team together for an all hands, and we made sure that people got called out by their peers for doing great stuff. I think it worked really well. And so that was one thing. We also tried not to take ourselves too seriously. And so again, there's a theme of fun. And so we tried to go ahead and if you've done projects before, you know what PDR and CDR, SIR, and all these reviews are. You work really, really hard to make sure you've got the best product you can have. If you're in a program, it's a key decision point, and those can be very stressful. So we did after review kind of outtakes, if you will, and so we could go ahead and enjoy each other and also go ahead and reminisce about some potential bloopers that may have happened over the course of the review. And generally there were at least a few. And then finally, because calm is so important, we went ahead and had something called Burgers Out Back, where we tried to go ahead and sponsor a weekly team-led cookout. And that was an opportunity for people to talk to each other in an informal setting where they could go ahead and communicate, maybe have some of the conversations they wouldn't have otherwise. In the age of teens with COVID and everything, that's a little bit more difficult. Um, but I think it's imperative that leaders go ahead and try and set it up where comm is fairly flat, and then people feel empowered to go ahead and say something or to go ahead and contact each other if there's a question, concern that they don't understand what's going on. I really like the idea of flat and transparent communications. And so if there's good news or bad news or indifferent, you want to make sure that your communication is timely. And so in this age, I'm thinking really written and email. And so we do status reports. And so if everything is just normal, you want to make sure that you get the information out to all your team members internally on the project so they know what you're reporting. You want to get it to stakeholders within your organization, within the community, and you want to get it to external stakeholders. Um, so everybody knows exactly the same news at the same time. It's actually critically important if it's bad news, because if I initially had some tendencies where I wanted to communicate bad news by calling people up and telling them and kind of working down a tree, if you will. That didn't work well for me. I ended up in a much better spot when I could communicate things that happened that may have been bad or potentially bad out to everybody at the same time, so they don't get surprised. And over a period of time, maybe I was over communicating, I don't know, but that helps develop trust, because that over a period of time, people will recognize that you're not hiding anything from anybody, and that you're trying to communicate openly and honestly. Um, and again, that's the way I try to run. Other people I know probably don't run that way. I think it works well. People underestimate the importance of team cohesion, and the one challenge where I've had, and this is in hindsight, that 95 to 98% of your team are going to contribute. And then you're going to run into problems with a small percentage of the team. And I think as a leader, you have to go ahead and try to assess your personnel and make sure that you don't have any people participating that could go ahead and debilitate the team. So you have to be very careful about screening screening the team, and then you have to believe that everybody has a place to contribute, but if they're not contributing and actually kind of taken away from the team, you probably want to move a little bit sooner rather than later, because you can't really, it's very hard to recognize what effect that's having on other team members, and what a drag on productivity it can be. I don't know that I'm completely proficient at it, because I think there's always something you can do better, and I try to work on it. And it kind of reminds me of something I learned in leadership school. Okay, and I'm pretty much self-taught, but it's kind of like you can't be taught to be a leader, but you can learn to be a leader. Um, and so if you take that mindset and say, well, I'm going to go ahead and try to learn to be the best leader I can, or the best project manager, you can learn things. And so the leadership team cohesion lessons I've learned are basically an amalgamation of some really talented project and program managers I've worked with over the years, with my own personal follies and phobies and everything else kind of stuck on top of it. Um, but people that I work with, I think they know that I'm generally um, very supportive of them, and trying to go ahead and be like a servant leader, to go ahead and let them do their best stuff. And I think if you can learn from others and then kind of consistently think of yourself as a servant, and at the end of the day, all of us are servants. We're here trying to go ahead and basically help NASA, help the United States, help the world community be the best we can. You've really got a good foundation to move forward. If you're a project manager and thinking about being a program manager, um, I would think really hard about it. I've worked with some incredible program managers, incredible, at the program level, and at the headquarters level. And they really have a tough job, because they're managing a portfolio of things. So you have to be able to go ahead and figure out priorities. You have to go ahead and work with a number of different political concerns and constraints that you might have, budgetary or otherwise, to go ahead and help project teams that are under your program succeed. So I think it's one thing to have a set of skills that lets you be maybe a successful project manager. Program managers are kind of like another level. Um, that they're really critical to helping the agency, succeed. But it's a very difficult job, and I don't know specifically, since I'm mostly a project guy, um, how difficult it is trying to balancing all these different entities to go ahead and have a good and healthy program.